I should start by noting that since the last time we were here, several of us have switched employers. So, Tabular is now part of Databricks. And I just want to briefly mention, we treat the community the same way that we always have, which is that those of us who participate in this community do so as individuals with the community's interests in mind. That is not in conflict with any of our goals from the Databricks side. In fact, I'm very optimistic about the Databricks involvement here, because their goal is to clarify the space and move towards there being fewer formats and more compatibility across all engines. That was the purpose of acquiring Tabular and working with us. And I do want to call out that we're going to continue working in this community, collaborating with you all, and we really appreciate the fact that we've been on the journey with all of you. If you have any questions about sort of our change in priorities or anything like that, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk and make sure we're not causing any heartburn for the community. So please do reach out. I think communicating and discussing your concerns, if there are any, is the best path forward. So thank you. Sorry to distract on just the very beginning. All right, I am actually going to highlight one thing, which is that the Iceberg Summit videos are online. I know that we've had a lot of people checking them out so far. Please go see them, share them. I think it gets a lot of good information about the project out there. So thank you to everyone who's talked and is sharing those videos. And then I'm going to hand it over to Fako to do the highlights, because he gathered all the highlights this week. Thanks, Fako.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, so I think one of the most exciting things is, and people are really waiting for this, is getting like the new version of Gradle. We've been on the very old version. I looked at it today. It's 8.1. I think it's copyright of 2016, so it's about time. Yeah, so thank you, Eduard, for actually doing the cloning on the Ref API itself, and JB for doing the actual updating to the latest version. So once we have this published in the Gradle plugin, we can actually update it, which is really cool, because it will also unlock quite a few other things that we're waiting for example, the Parquet update. Thanks you, Eduard.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to the Gradle and Ref API thing. So we forked the plugin from Palantir as a short-term solution for us to get to upgrade Gradle and go to a newer Parquet version and stuff. Long term, we need to see what we need to do, because the plugin itself isn't maintained anymore. And yeah, we'll need to figure out what the long-term goal is, how we want to.
JB?
Yeah, just to second what Eduard said. So I identified the issue in the Rev API Gradle plugin. I just commented on my pull request on Eduard's repo. And so we basically have two pull requests ongoing. We have the one that basically going to upgrade to the custom Gradle Rev API plugin just to fix and be able to upgrade Gradle. And I create another pull request to use Rev API script instead of a plugin, just to remove a dependency with a plugin, with a Gradle plugin. So that's for midterm. Short term, discussing with Eduard, we agreed that it will be easier to first have the plugin fixed with a custom release, and then after 1.6.0 release, we can move forward with a script and whatever.
Actually, the script was my idea, but when you think of it, you think of a very small script, but then things grow and grow and things get complicated. Yeah. So I agree, like going for the Ref API and forking it is like the best solution for now. So let's continue, because there were also So thank you, Manu, for working on the docs. We switched to the docs. Thank you, Brian, for that a while ago, but there were still some rough edges. So Manu polished away quite a few of them, which is great. Piotr is doing a lot of work on the CI and also working towards JDK 21, which is great. And Jehan actually fixed like an issue with rewriting positional deletes, which is like field ID 1000, which is a very magic number for those who know. So thanks for that. On the Python side, we actually start dipping our toes into the snapshot management. So I think this is very exciting. Python is very lightweight, so it's very easy to, for example, do like fast forward or creating branches or creating tags. So Jimney is doing a lot of work on that, which is awesome. And thanks Sung for actually working on the partitioned writes.
That was nice.
So we don't have all of them yet because not all of them are natively implemented in Arrow. But for the temporal ones, we actually have them in, which is really cool to see. So thank you, Sung, for doing that. On the Rust, things are nicely coming together on the read side. I think that's also, we're going to talk later today on the new release. But Shabana actually worked on filtering out the manifest from the manifest list based on the summaries. So that's really cool to also have that in. It's going to be very fast, being able to use all the iceberg metadata in combination with Rust. So I'm very excited about that. And thanks for Matt working on the Go implementation. The PR for predicates and expressions is out. I'm actually start reviewing a couple of times, but hopefully we can get it in and also get like a feature completeness in Go. Ryan, do you want to do the upcoming releases?
Well, I was just going to hand over to JB to talk about the iceberg-java 1.6 release.
Perfect, JB.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan and Foucault. So the two main things we want to include in this release is merging the Kafka commit coordinator PR, which is targeted for 1.6.0 release. And then, as Foucault already mentioned, is the Gradle update and Red API. That's what I have on my bucket for this release, according to the GitHub issues. So I sent a message, I think it was last week. If you have other things you want to include, please let me know as soon as possible, because I would like to start the process next week, if possible. So if you have anything you want to include a blocker, please let me know as soon as possible.
Okay. And Renji, do you want to talk about the 0.3 release?
Yeah. So the 0.3 release mainly focus on the read part. We have now file-based planning, and we did a lot. We have a complete expression system. So, and we also include partition pruning, manifest pruning, data file pruning, and filter push down to parquet the reader. And we can now read iceberg table into Arrow record batch stream. So I think we can. I think it's a good time. And but now we don't. Currently, we still don't support the deletions. But also, I think also we have landed several catalogs such as have catalog and the glue catalog. So I think it's a good time to ship a release so that some customers can, some users can use it now.
That's awesome. Yeah, what kind of support do you need on that, or are there blockers?
One blocker is that there's a bug. There's a bug about Arrow, but it has been fixed in Arrow, but Arrow still, but it will be shipped the next iceberg-rust release. So I'm not sure should we release without fixing that bug, or we should hold on to wait for the release, iceberg's release.
I think it depends on the bug.
Yeah.
What's the bug?
So it's about like able to read and write the field IDs. So that's one of the very core features of Iceberg, of course.
Yes.
So we actually ran into an issue where one of the fields has been renamed at some point and actually caused like read issues.
I would probably wait on that one because I think one of the most critical things is correctness. And that sounds like a pretty bad or hard correctness bug if we're not able to project columns correctly because those IDs are being dropped. But that's, I'm not all that familiar, so I would probably say like you guys are the experts here.
Yeah, I know also JB, you're also working on the Avro release, so maybe, I don't know, like if you have like an internal timeline for yourself.
Yeah, so as you know, Focov is one security fix that I did and still under review. So I think we should be able to cut the release as soon, submit the release to vote as soon as it's merged. So I'm working with Martin especially. Timeline is basically my top priority right now is really Rev API and Gradle update in Iceberg. So as soon as it's done, I will switch to Avro. I don't think it's a blocker for the 1.6.0 release of Iceberg, honestly. It's good to have, but not a blocker. As Ryan said, it's better to not try something last minute that can cause issues. So I would prefer to not rush too much for Avro, and we can include in the next release cycle.
I think that's the issue that affects the Java implementation, right? But there's this
Correct.
issue that affects the Rust implementation that is blocking the Rust. So
yeah.
I mean, we could always.
We can cut the Avro release, generally speaking, but not update in Java, just update in Rust. That's basically
Okay.
the idea.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get that out soon because I know there's a ton of good work going on in the Rust community to get the job planning done. It sounds pretty exciting to be able to read, into arrow vector or arrow buffers and things. All right, Paco, back to you for PyIceberg 0.7.
Yes, so actually working on getting an 0.7 out, which will include like the partitioned writes. So yeah, it's mostly, we haven't sent like an email on the dev list, so it's like a call. Just if you have anything that you want to be included there, please reach out. There's also one PR, right? I actually want to run by you, Ryan. It's about like implementing like a partial deletes, or maybe then like less time, just to make sure that that we're on the same line there. And I think, yeah, I'm very excited to get it out because we have a lot of good stuff in there. It would be great to get it out to the public.
Sounds great. Just let me know what you need from me.
Yeah.
Always happy to help on those things.
We'll bring you on the PR. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to discussion. I think I want to start with the issue that we discussed in pretty great detail last time, the OAuth concerns and everything. And after thinking about our discussion last time, I think what's happening is we're kind of focused on what happens to this one endpoint rather than the larger goal of what are we trying to accomplish, which is, I believe, we're all pretty bought into compatibility with multiple auth systems, right? The SIG-v4, OAuth 2, implementations of those auth systems. So, commercial OAuth 2 endpoints and things like that, as well as keeping the actual API, pretty much separate from those auth systems. So we talked a lot about whether or not to get rid of the tokens endpoint. I don't, personally, I'm not convinced that that is a good idea because it does document what people have been doing, and it is an avenue for people to have an implementation. But I think that is mostly a distraction from us focusing on the path forward, which is how do we get really great OAuth 2 support and be able to essentially have an OAuth 2 service that is separate from the REST service and move forward there. So I think that we probably want to focus on the end state a bit more than this question of, do we want to deprecate the tokens API? Because the rest of the doc, I know it was just recently published, so we should give people some time to go through it. I went through it this morning, and you know, the majority of it I think is not really controversial. It is, hey, let's improve the OAuth 2 integration and clarify where the two specs don't overlap. So I think that we can probably move forward on those things. I don't know if there are objections out there, but I think if we concentrate on reviewing the other things and circle back once we have a more clear plan on what the OAuth 2 integration should look like, I think we'll have an easier path to making a decision about the tokens endpoint.
Let me quickly chime in on this one. So as you said, having great OAuth 2 support is really advantageous in addition to Zigbee 4 and whatever. But great OAuth 2 support also means that there need to be multiple endpoints and not just this OAuth tokens endpoint. So there are two issues then at play. So A, you need multiple endpoints, which the specification does not mention, and B, there is already implementation, a very rudimentary implementation out there that tries to implement this one, and this one is really getting into the man-in-the-middle thing. So there is already a proven risk that people do these ugly, insecure things. So removing this endpoint should, in my opinion, really be done.
So let's get that path forward documented and understand how far away it is currently, and then we can circle back on the tokens endpoint, because I think we should like understand where we're heading, and then we can make a decision on this once we know a little bit more about what this should look like.
Well, actually, I was a bit under the impression that it's not controversial to remove it, because on one of the PRs or issues, it was already mentioned either by you or by Dan, that being more explicit what the endpoint is, meaning to explicitly configure it, would be the avenue forward.
Maybe.
So I'm a bit surprised at that point.
Yeah. So just in terms of wearing my Apache hat there, if it's hard to get a consensus altogether, maybe we can start a code modification vote just to get feedback from everyone and have a kind of consensus. I mean, the best option is to have a lazy consensus altogether. I mean, but at some point, if there are different views, maybe give a chance for the community and contributor to express and say, okay, what could be, I mean, at Apache, we have a code modification vote, and we can consider this more like a code modification, in my opinion. So maybe we can still discuss about that. I don't have any problem, but at some point, if we don't have consensus, maybe it makes sense to have some vote. Just my 2 cents on that.
I don't think we typically like to solve these things through a vote, and that's because it's not a majority situation. I actually think that there's a lot of confusion about what is currently in the spec and why it's there and the intent. So I think focusing on what we all agree on is a good path. So for example, the doc says that we don't want OAuth 2 to be the only authentication mechanism allowed by the spec, and I agree. In fact, it's not. So I'm seeing misunderstandings even in the design doc, and I think like focusing, working past that and building a shared understanding is the point at which we're at, not a let's make a decision point. So like, yes, we can eventually, if we need to, say like, we're not coming to consensus on this. I just don't quite think that we are at a point where we're all on the same page about the issues and we have a a fundamental disagreement where we would want a code modification vote. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. Just wanted to say that if it's needed, I don't think we need now, Ryan. If it's needed, we can start the code modification vote.
Yeah. I think if the issues are clear and we're still not coming to an agreement or a path forward, we can always use that option. Sorry, Dan, I interrupted.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just want to comment because I think in the earlier discussion, I was more in line with like what Robert was saying in terms of like extracting some of what we've defined in the REST spec that actually overlaps with the RFC and kind of separating the authentication in a sense that we don't need to have anything explicit in the REST spec. The question about the tokens endpoint, do we keep it in there? Do we remove that? I think that's still up for discussion. I'm actually not opposed to removing it because I don't think it really adds a whole lot of value. And for some of the security things, I do agree that there are probably better ways that through the reference implementation, we can kind of enforce that we aren't doing anything that would, unintentionally cause security concerns. But I do think that everybody needs to go back to the recently posted doc. We need to go through it and kind of figure out what the next steps are. The one thing that I would say is like there's kind of two things that are jumbled in there. One is changes to the REST spec, and the other set is changes to the reference implementation. And I think we need a clear divide between those because I think it really is, a lot of it really falls into the reference implementation. We should actually be removing most of it from any sort of spec and just saying like, hey, this is kind of how the reference implementation deals with any one of these authentication mechanisms and just document it. So.
Jack?
I guess it's actually a good time to discuss about the third point I added in the talk. Should we?
Let's move on to that because I again don't want to spend a ton of time considering we spent so much time on this last time. So yeah, Jack, why don't you talk about the REST catalog stuff that you wanted to
I would like to propose, like, if we look into this talk, there are like 7 different topics about REST. I think it's a much better use of time if we have separate sync meetings for people who would like to work on the REST spec. And also as a part of that, I think we have discussed in the past to move the catalog piece out of the main repo to a separate repo, maybe like iceberg-rest. So I would like to also propose that as a part of this process.
So I think where the proposal was last time was to move the non-REST catalogs outside of the reference implementation repo, and only have the REST catalog. I'm not sure that a separate. So I guess there are two issues. There are separate sync meetings and sort of the path forward there, and then there's the do we move REST out of the main repo? I actually wouldn't move REST out of the main repo. So focusing on that question first, because we have implementations in Rust, and I think there's one coming in Go, there's one in Python, there's one in Java, and I think that we want to have, basically a very clear, implementation out there that's always present. So when we were talking about the other catalogs, I thought that was, hey, let's move the other catalogs into a potentially create a service that proxies to those other catalogs using REST. I think it's important that we keep the catalog in the main repo, especially if we're moving towards like what JB has proposed, which is to make REST catalog the canonical catalog implementation.
I think in my mind it's less about implementation because we have a Java one, a Rust one. I'm more talking about the format itself, like the spec. Just similar to like you have like a Parquet format repo for just the format.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So would we move all specs out of the Java repo?
Yeah, but that's basically what I have in mind as well. Because what you said, Ryan, makes sense. I mean, we have Python, we have Rust. So I'm not comfortable to see Python or Rust using the Java repo, basically, today, if we consider Iceberg as the kind of Java repo, because we are mixing the spec and Java and so on.
Okay. So the idea is not to move the client code it's to move the specs into their own repo.
Correct. Yeah.
I'm not. So for context on the Parquet format one, we had the exact opposite the exact opposite discussion several times, and there was, there's a lot of concern, like, people have trouble finding it, it's not clear where it is, and I thought that we'd actually combined that into the the Parquet Java repo at one point. So I'm not sure that it's a clear win to move the specs out, especially since they've been living in one place for so long. So what's the huge benefit to doing that, Jack?
I think to me it's just a more cleaner place for us to discuss all these kind of things. So maybe we should separate the discussion of the separate meetings first. I feel that's a less controversial part, seems like. Would you like to first finalize that part?
Okay. Yeah. So to me, like, there's a lot of movement in the REST area right now, with a lot of the proposals from you guys at AWS. I do want to make sure that we're both able to move fast and not starving the other, concerns of time. So yeah, what's the purpose that you're considering?
I think it's both to move faster on the REST proposals, so that we have people who are interested in proposal to discuss in a more focused manner, just like you have people who interested in Python having Python sync meetings.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, it also helps to accelerate the format side, because I think like the GO proposal, the variant, there are quite a few that has been dragging for quite a long time. We haven't even had the time to discuss those. So I think moving the rest to a separate discussion can also help that part of the progress in the format.
That sounds pretty reasonable to me. I do want to move faster in this area. My only concern is that this is something that affects all the implementations, right? Because it's a specification topic. And so I want to make sure that we're the discussion there is as broad as possible. So that's my only concern there, but I don't think I have a strong opinion one way or another. Sorry, let's get to people who've had their hands up for a long time. Mafako. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I was just posting this in the doc as well. So we actually around like renaming the doc. I actually suggested this earlier also on the mailing list. It was when we started like the different languages, and I think especially the big problem is, so if you rename it, the links stay redirect, but if you create like a new a repository like Iceberg for all the specs and such, then all the links break, and I think that's the biggest problem. And that I think that might add like even more confusion later on, because then people are not able to find it anymore. So I would be a bit hesitant of like actually renaming like these kind of repositories, because it feels to me like the ship has already sailed a bit on that one. Yeah, I think, and there was something else, but let's continue on that.
What do you think about a separate sync while you're while you're here?
Yeah, so we have the Python sync. That's a separate sync. I do think it makes sense to break out like these specific topics, like a REST catalog sync. And I also see the benefit of having like a global sync. But I agree that maybe we should focus the syncs a bit more. For example, we have the Python sync where we actually go a bit more in depth about like the things that we're working on with Python, going over design docs and such. It feels always like the sync is 1 hour, but it's always a bit short. So I think it makes sense to split out things.
We could also make this one more frequent. We could go to 2-week cadence instead of 3 if we have more things to talk about. So, Robert, looks like you're next.
Yeah, basically seconding on what's already been said, but if we I think it doesn't make sense to move only the REST spec, but rather have an iceberg-spec repo where all the specs live, but then also have the whole website there. Because generating the website, if it references like the REST spec or table format spec in a different repo, that sounds a bit complicated to generate docs, just from a practical point of view.
I agree, and that's one reason why we just recently moved the the docs back into the iceberg repo. As far as repo renaming goes, I'm not a huge fan of renaming just because it messes up so many remotes and links and all of that. I would also just say like I'm hesitant to do more more have more turn on the documentation side, unless there's a really pressing need for it. I would say like it's probably not worth the churn in my opinion. But let's definitely figure out the other half of this question, which is how do we move faster on the REST catalog stuff. I think let's have more regular syncs. We can have dedicated syncs. That sounds like a very reasonable thing. Jack, do you want to take on scheduling those syncs?
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome, thank you. Bits.
Yeah, so I was just going to say for the syncs too, I think it'll also be nice to have like if we have all of them in these recordings. So I'm happy to like be the note taker, facilitator type person for all of them and try to. I know I've already been like fumbling on this one quite a bit, but I want to start building up a system that like effectively will get the notes out for all these different subsyncs so that I just wanted to make it more digestible for people moving forward. I think that's another hard thing is that not everybody can make it to all of these, and so having a way to kind of like get the at least these Fathom summaries, to kind of get a gist of what's going on in all the subsyncs if you miss one and that kind of thing. That's something I'd like to try to like take on as well. So Jack, if you're setting up something else, I'd like to work with you and Fako. Maybe we can even start doing those more for the Python ones as well.
Sounds good.
Great, thank you. Always nice to have more volunteers. All right, I think the next thing on the list is materialized views. So Jan, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Yes, I wanted to give a quick update on the materialized view proposal. And since the last community sync, we had a special sync to discuss materialized views further. And I think we've come a long way. We've answered most of the functional questions. And now it's pretty much mostly maybe naming things, still some open questions. So I wanted to encourage everybody to have a look at the document again, and then maybe we can solve the discussions about how we're naming the things. I think the structure, or at least as I understood Dan's proposal, I wrote it down. If there's anything that you thought should be different, I think we can also solve this. And then I would suggest that maybe we could start a PR to adopt the spec definitions. But
that sounds good. So we're in a position where we think that maybe adopting the spec is, we have a clear write-up of the spec, and then so I guess that's what the PR is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Creating that
it's defined already in the document. So I mean, there's like implementation wise, there will be more open questions, like how would you represent incremental updates? There's going to be a lot of updates, but I think from metadata wise, I think we've fixed most of the things that are required for the implementation, and we can go further. And I don't think it's easy to see all the different possibilities of open questions that will pop up later and solve it all in this spec. I think we've reached a good point where we can move ahead.
Yeah, so Jan, I just want to clarify the PR you're talking about is actually a PR to go update like the view spec and all of the actual spec definition so that we can actually, hey, solidify this now into something that we could actually all agree on +1 and commit.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I.
That sounds great. Thank you for taking that on, Benny.
Hey, yeah. So, I think it was really great that Dan convinced us that we should separate the view lineage versus the refresh state. If I look at like the state of the current spec, the next longest comment in there is around like the max staleness property. So I think we still have a little bit to discuss there in terms of like how we, how we're gonna what does max staleness mean, and I also have some more thoughts about like, the data that's actually being stored in, like what is the latest data that's actually being captured in the last refresh of the materialization storage table. Like we have the concept of like all the different like snapshot IDs, and you can go and look that up. That could be very expensive. So I think we're really close though. So I think that last meeting was extremely like productive. But yeah.
Right.
Yes, I think we have a few more discussions about the max staleness, right? I have some ideas about whether it should be on the view versus the storage table. A lot of this is very engine specific, right? But yeah, overall, it was great progress.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Sorry, Jan, did you have one more?
No, yeah, maybe my perception was a little bit different. That I thought maybe I thought we don't have so many open questions, but yeah, I think we just discussed it in the document and then move ahead from there.
That seems like a pretty minor one. Like if you're ready to start with the PR, I think you should just start with the PR, and we can kind of handle like the staleness question and any of the other little things. Like it'll probably be easy to resolve.
All right.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like we have a clear path forward there, and that's wonderful to hear. I know this was tough to get to that point, so thank you for pushing through. Really appreciate it. All right. We have a few leftovers from the last meeting. I wanted to check in on two specifically that I've been looking at. One is the server capabilities, because I think server capabilities kind of define how we move forward with the REST spec. So I think that one's actually pretty critical to get in. So, for example, the plan and pre-plan, which is the other one that I think is very, very close to being able to go into the spec. How do we indicate that a service supports the plan and pre-plan endpoints without going and hitting that endpoint and then falling back because we get some either unauthorized, unsupported, 500 error, 504, how do we actually know whether or not we should make these requests and hit those endpoints? And then also figure out that the service doesn't support something. So Edward put together the third one on this list, which is the server capabilities. I want to highlight that. I think that we have a little bit more to do there because the backward compatibility is a little unclear. Whether we should have a capability for tables, whether we should label every single endpoint with all of the tags and things like that. But I want to open that up because I think getting this in makes it easier to get the others in. Robert?
Yeah, I was thinking that capabilities are not very security sensitive, especially they are rather essential in some places. Like, do we support ZigBee 4 or 2, whatever kind of things. So I was thinking whether that should be a separate endpoint that's accessible anonymously.
So we could definitely do that. I think the rule of thumb that I'm kind of going with is that we want to avoid too many setup requests. So if you're already going to be potentially hitting an OAuth server, for example, for OAuth, or things like that, it's just a question of, how many requests do we need to do in order to do that one-time setup of a catalog. In some systems, that could be quite expensive. For example, if you have like a short-lived cluster, like at Netflix, for example, we would spin up a Spark service, and then it would need to set up a catalog. And even if you reuse Spark clusters, setting up a catalog in a new session is something that we do quite often in some cases. But I'd like to avoid the unnecessary round trips if possible. Dan?
Yeah, I would just add to that the biggest issue that we've seen is actually more around like orchestration, people using things like PyIceberg to go and like update table properties. But if they have to hit a capabilities endpoint, a config endpoint, and then hit the table property, and they're doing this like thousands and thousands of times, actually, even though this would be a lightweight endpoint, like it's probably a static thing that the server does, it's a lot of requests from the client itself. And then the second piece is like, I think, back to the security question, I would lean to like all the endpoints. If you're doing security, like all the endpoints being secure, like the authentication should happen prior to any sort of interaction with the server, because you don't really want your servers out there with open endpoints, declaring that they're iceberg-rest servers. That just from a security surface standpoint, I would prefer that, hey, they're actually all locked down if you're locking them down.
Yeah, I think to me it also makes sense that the client is in control of configuring security properties and settings. Like, hey, here's my OAuth 2 endpoint. Here's how I authenticate to this service, because I don't think we want the service, especially an unauthenticated endpoint, to say like, hey, go over here and talk to this service using this protocol or anything like that. Because if that gets compromised or anything, the client might send credentials to that service. Edward?
So talking about backwards compatibility and the config endpoint, under what feature or capability do we see this, given that it's like a very central endpoint? Like, would we just put it into the tables capability, saying that it's like by default, exists by default? Or
I think the config endpoint should be there for basically everything, because that's part of catalog setup, right? I wouldn't necessarily say implicit. I just think that there are some endpoints that are going to be used by multiple capabilities. So I think I noted this in my review yesterday. Like tables and views, for example, both use list namespaces. So if we have list namespaces and you're implementing both tables and views, I'd say like we just label that with both tables and views.
that makes sense.
And so like I would probably structure it that way, where everything just says like, maybe we have a special but it's not a terrible idea, Amog, to say like it's implicit, because it is something that we expect every catalog to hit as part of setup. Maybe we have a setup capability, I don't know, but like clearly like we're not going to not hit the config endpoint, because that's where we probably get capabilities, assuming that we don't want extra round trips or unauthenticated endpoints. So I'd say like that's sort of a special case in that it's required for catalog setup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of defining it as implicit, because that makes it easier to handle backwards compatibility, because you just assume it's always existing and you call it anyway.
Yeah.
You don't have to, assume with some default capability. It just always exists.
I think that's probably something that is just required everywhere, and that's a reasonable thing to do. And then from there, we have, some default set of capabilities if the service doesn't respond with capabilities. And I think that we'll want to keep that fairly narrow. I think Jack had a point about that as well. Like, how do we guarantee compatibility too? Okay, so please check out the capabilities. I think we're going to iterate on it. I'll do another round of review as we get that going, and then I believe that what we've established is we'll bring this up for a vote because it's a fairly substantial change to a spec. We'll bring it up for a vote on the mailing list. So yeah, please be familiar with it and everything. So thank you guys. Really quickly, I wanted to check in on the plan and pre-plan endpoints. I noticed yesterday I went to review that and I saw that the design doc had disappeared. So I wanted to check in and see, if we can get the access to that open back up. I think that's super close to being ready to go.
Oh yeah, just to clarify, because of the acquisition issue, our company has temporarily closed all the related contributions, but I think the cloud has already mostly cleared, so we would like to resume that soon. So
Okay.
I guess we can discuss that after a few days, most likely, yeah.
Sounds great. Let me know if we can help out. I am very sorry to cause headache for you guys. Yeah, we'll get through this. Okay. There's a big list here. My preference next would be the SQL UDFs, because I think there was a misunderstanding on my part on the mailing list. But if there are people that want to get that one last thing in, I want to open it up and make sure that we're not, we're using this time wisely and not blocking on anything in particular that's important.
I think we all can go through the proposal again, and then yeah, we can discuss it afterwards instead of discussing here in this.
You mean the client, the SQL UDFs?
Yeah, the proposal is out and it is attached in the issue. The design doc is attached, so we can do that.
Can I ask one clarifying thing? Sure. I think what I thought was when I see UDF, I think of like plugging in C++ code into Postgres or plugging Python into Spark or something like that. But the scope of this, if I'm not mistaken, is like, how do we define SQL expressions that are UDFs? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I take back what I said then about like being skeptical, because I think that is a pretty reasonable thing to do. My concern was that we were trying to define essentially an API for plugging in Java code everywhere or plugging in Python code everywhere. And like that sort of thing, I think, is both engine specific because the engine is implemented in some language, and specific to the language you're trying to plug in, and like the combination of engine language and UDF language and API is like the combinatorics are bad. So if we're talking like, hey, how do we express some expressions or something like that? Yeah, let's because that seems more like the view problem. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Any other things? We can actually get 5 minutes back if there's nothing that people want to. I think we already covered the rebrand as part of the discussion before.
Okay, let me ask a quick question. So, what if iceberg-rust support more storage surface than iceberg-java? Do we need to start a proposal first or something?
Oh, sorry. This was the more storage services. I think that totally fine. So the you know, at least in the iceberg-java implementation, we try to be storage agnostic, and in the spec as well, where the spec just says these storage locations are, you know, fully qualified URIs, you know, really just a location string. So I don't think that there's any problem with Rust supporting more storage backends than Java. In fact, Java supports the HDFS file system, or, you know, Hadoop file system API. So, you know, it supports a whole lot of things that we don't even know about.
Are there specific ones that you're concerned about, you know, in terms of storage? Like, are there ones that you already have interest in supporting that aren't currently supported?
For example, if we want to support Oracle Cloud, there are something involved with configuration. For example, we need to add some new config items that all our implementation should agree on. For example, address, access key ID, or secret access key, something like this.
Well, you might want to take, so, you know, we support the, you know, GCP, AWS, Azure. Each one of those have like some slightly different configuration things that are typically handled through just like properties.
Yeah.
So you could look at any of those reference implementations, but I don't see any reason why we wouldn't support, you know, Google Cloud or Oracle Cloud or anything else that's, you know, commonly used. I think the real question would just be if there's like something that's so fringe, we have to be careful about, like, does that introduce a maintenance cost for something that, you know, people don't plan on really continuing to use, or there isn't really a community around? That would be the only concern that I would have.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hi folks, just want to quickly mention that about the geo proposal, right? So we work with Xuanwo about that, and we already created a GitHub issue and submitted the geo proposal for that. And in particular, in that geo proposal, we are proposing to add this thing called geometry logical type with a bunch of table properties, and we also want to add this a spatial expression called st-intersects, as well as one partition transform for geometry type. And there are lots of detail there, and so we have got lots of good feedback from the geo community, but we'd like to collect some feedback from the iceberg committers and iceberg PMCs. So yeah, and we can schedule a separate meeting for that, and we have scheduled a meeting with the Snowflake folks on that for next Monday, and let us know that if you guys want to participate.
Sounds great. I would love to be there. if you're, I'm always interested in geo stuff. That's fun. So I'll take a look too.
Sure.
Did you have a comment? Brian, your hand's up. Are you?
Yeah, I would just like we're gonna actually end at 11:59 unless you guys want me to really quickly upgrade to the Google Premium. So are we good?
Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming out and discussing. I'm glad we got through a lot of issues this week. So thanks a lot. See you next time.
Awesome. See you next time, everyone.
Hey guys, cheers.
I'll get those updated notes out soon.
Thanks.